cost to doing the work and there's a cost to doing the same. You have to.
Welcome to another episode of She Blooms. I know I have been MIA, but it was been spring break and I was moving and we just wanted to get settled fully into our place as we just kind of just came back. But if you are new here, welcome. And if you are consistently joining us every single time, I thank you for your ongoing support. Thank you for continuing to support my channel and watching these videos. Anyways, so if you guys know, like at the beginning of this year, I really spent the 2 weeks leading up to New Year's fasting and praying. That is something that my spirit was prompted to do, and I was just obedient in that. Fast forward, right, like New Year's, I really spent the entire day fasting, praying, spending time in worship, and I gave God like my full yes and my full surrender. And it's not like I haven't done that in the past, but I think there is a component that I know for a fact, like I have lived my life as a lukewarm Christian, right? Like I knew the word, I would, spend time like reading my Bible, spend time in worship, but I was still very much living in sin. And if you follow me on my Instagram, like I recently talked about it, like being very convicted with having sex outside of marriage. It is something that like I had been engaging in, and so anytime that I would like have sex, like I would just notice like I felt like I was further away from God, or more so in a sense, like I felt like I got to a place where it was almost like I was hiding from him in shame, because like I knew right from wrong, right? Like I knew I shouldn't be engaging in sexual acts like outside of marriage, but even still, right? Like my flesh was so tempted to it. And I was like reminded, right? Like we are only tempted based off of our heart's desires. So if we are desiring like sex, if we are desiring lust, then that is going to be our temptation. So I fully surrendered that to God, and I just allowed myself to be like pruned out of that, right? Like understanding the implications that like it has brought me, because obviously, right, like I'm like a single woman, and so it's like, why am I continuously exchanging my body with other people knowing that it's really not going anywhere? Anyways, so I made the promise to God that like I would not be having sex outside of marriage, and I made a promise, like my future spouse, whoever he is, that I was really going to preserve my body only and solely for him. And so I have been very diligent about that. Like God has continued to like bless me in that, and has given me the opportunity and space to grow and cultivate in that, right? Like including like very like important people who I feel like are important, because they are also on this like journey of abstinence, right? So like continuing to like hold me accountable to what I said I was going to do at the beginning of the year. So anyways, so back to me giving God my yes. Like I don't know where you guys are on your walk, or if you guys have done this before, but like anytime you give your full yes to God, like I think people often think like, oh my God, my life is gonna get so glorious, everything's gonna be great, but like God is going to remove things out of your life that is keeping you away from him. And I've done it before, right? I've said the prayer of like, God, like anything that is keeping me away from you, like remove it from me. And I did that prayer actually in the beginning of 2018. And I remember like almost instantly, like my relationship with my husband went from like hell to like the pits of hell, right? Like it was like almost immediately, right? Because there was a component of him that was keeping me from God. Like obviously there was like so much like abuse that was associated with that relationship, but there was also a component of him that was like pulling me away from the church. So he I was like involved in the internship at that point, and so a lot of my life was like fully dedicated to ministry, fully dedicated to the church, and it was like always a problem in our relationship. And it got to a point where he was just like, I don't believe in God, which was like news to me, considering that like I felt like when we first got together, he actually had a faith, right? Like he grew up Catholic. And I was like at the point in my life or whatever where like I didn't believe in God. Like I didn't have a relationship with him. Like I still had so much bitterness and anger towards God due to like everything that occurred in my childhood. So when I feel like God like finally like revealed himself to me like through that relationship, like I like immediately like jumped on fire for God, right? Like I was like, okay, I'm going to get baptized. Like I am going to ingrain myself like in the community of believers, because I know that that is such an important component of, you know, walking in your relationship with God. And it all of a sudden became like a burden in our relationship, where I felt like I was like, okay, well, I'm waking up at, 4 o'clock in the morning to go serve the church, like set it up and stuff like that, or involved in this internship. And it just became like a war of battle. And not to say, right, like sometimes like the enemy will creep into our declarations to God and use that to pervert us, to pull us away. But I also know, right, like at that time, like I was very ingrained in like God, and he had given me so much confirmation. But like even fast, like rewind, like I know for a fact that I shouldn't have been in that marriage to begin with, because like before we actually got married, like God was like leading me away from it. And at the time, like I was just like, okay, like I allowed someone, I've talked about it before, I allowed someone to talk to me into like believing that it was just fears and it was just normal. But there was so much abuse that had already occurred before we actually got married. But I'm just like, okay, well, I'm a single mom, or I don't want to be a single mom, because at the time we did have Rowan already. And so I was like, I don't want to be a single mom. Like, okay, maybe it is just fears, like no big deal. But let me tell you something, like before I get into the rest of this, is that the devil will always capitalize on your shame. And that is something that like I have like realized through my walk with God, is that like anytime there is shame present, the devil will do anything in his power to capitalize on that shame to continue to pull you further and further away from what God has wanted you to. And right, like I genuinely live my life with like no regrets, right? Because everything serves purpose. And in me being disobedient at that time, and in me being led astray to believe that it was just fear, like I have like 2 beautiful children, right? Like, and that is like my entire life right now is like dedicated to like being a mom and like nurturing them. And so there is like no regrets, right? Because like every lesson serves a purpose. And I truly believe that like I wouldn't be the woman I am today, like if I haven't had my kids, but more importantly, have gone through that experience. Because like who would have known, right? Like who would have known where I would have actually ended up, like if I didn't meet my ex-husband, because I was living my life like a complete mess, right? Like I was like very risky. I was doing like a bunch of things. Like I genuinely thought I was invincible. So it was like, sometimes I do feel like God positions people or whatever in your life in order to get you to him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always going to end up in your destiny. And I think I have like realized that like with both of my relationships in my adult life. Like I've said, like I've only been in 2 relationships in my adult life, and one of them I was married to. But both of those relationships, I have realized that like I shouldn't have been in them to begin with, but I think that if I would have actually tapped into my discernment, I wouldn't have been in them to begin with. Everything serves purpose, and I am very grateful that like I have been able to learn more about myself as this, but more so in a sense like learn about like who God is. So I like have been like reading my Bible, and God like had like brought me to the chapter of Luke, and chapter 11, like verse 24, it says, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house swept and clean and put in order. Then it goes and takes 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. And when he brought me to this scripture, I was like, okay, like, okay, like I didn't understand the meaning of it, and like, then God revealed it to me so clearly. I remember I was in the shower the other day, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like, oh my gosh, like, and the way like I was able to retain the information is God told me that, Stacey, there has been so many times that you have been fully empty, and you have been seeking love, and you have been desiring love, and you've been wanting commitment. And I truly believe, right, like that people are on assignment from the enemy to pull you further away from your destiny and who God is, right? Like pull you away from kingdom. And so he's like, you have been craving what only I can give you. And so anytime you meet someone, you allow them to enter into you only to, again, feel defeated, feel lack, feel that you are like worthless, that you are undeserving. And I am the only person who can feel that darkened place. And I'm just like, God, I love love. And he's like, that is your problem. And so I think that often people want the glamorous God. People want the God who is gonna like, you know, love them and comfort them. And he is that, but it's like oftentimes we don't want God who's the convictor, the one who is actually going to call out our sin and tell us to fully repent, the God in the Bible who will literally remove everything from you that is keeping you away from him, the God who is like, will literally allow you to rot in your sin and walk away from you because you are disobeying him. No one wants that God. Everybody wants the God who is full of grace and full of mercy, but the mercy of God and the grace of God has never allowed us to continue to rot and live in our sin. The grace and mercy of God is for people who are infants to believe, people who are starting their walk with God. And the reality is, like, if you are still living in that infancy state, then you are not growing in God. You are not spending time in your word. You are not seeking him out actively, because there is a growth process that has to occur in order for you to fully understand who God is. And so back to the story. So he's just like, you have been so empty, right? Like, you have been desiring love. And recently, right, like, my ex-boyfriend came back like they always do, and he didn't have access to me this time. And I think that's why God had been revealing this to me just in general. He didn't have access to me because he had no entry points. And the reason why he had no entry points is because I have been intentional about filling myself up with God, filling myself up with his word, filling myself up with only the idea of fully seeking his face. And I'm not calling people demons by any means, but like, Cinderella, if the shoe fits, wear it. But again, I believe that people are on assignment to fully pull you away from who God is and what he has said about you and what he has spoken over your life. And if I go back to the promise of God of telling me that he will never allow another man to abuse me, then I have to be okay with waiting and sitting and allowing his prophecy to fulfill in my life. And I think oftentimes, like in today's society, in our culture, we are so fixated on the idea of like consistency. We are so fixated on the idea of romance. We are so fixated on the idea of love that it's like the devil is consistent too. So it's like we have to be very, very mindful and like practice discernment of figuring out like what spirit is in this person. Like I remember because it's so ingrained in my head. Anytime my ex-husband would get a rise out of me, right? Because like he was so verbally abusive. So anytime he would say something to me and I would respond in anger, right? Like which is something that like I have to fix, right? Because like if someone can control you in anger, then they can control you just in general. And so I remember getting upset about it and he would get this smirk. He would get this smirk on his face, and it was so ingrained in my head for so long. Oh my God, I'm getting so emotional. And so when I was dating my ex-boyfriend, I remember there was a time where just the nastiest argument, literally the nastiest argument, and he had the same smirk. And from that moment, I realized what spirit was in him was the same spirit that was in my ex-husband. And those same spirits have been actively attacking me to make me feel like I am undeserving of full love. I think oftentimes we will, you know, like shame people of like, oh my God, they're all the same. Why are all men, why are all women the same? But it's like, no, like we have to stop thinking that all people are the same, and more so understanding that there is a real spirit out there. There is a real devil out there, and he is attacking us. And so instead of saying that all women or all men are the same, realize and understand that no, you genuinely just lack discernment to decide if this person is for you. And we are just going to be very honest and transparent about that. There is nothing wrong with desiring love, but if our desire of love is overpowering who God has for us, or if our desire for love is overpowering the relationship with God, then we are always going to be at a deficit. And so like I want to encourage you all, like be very hyper fixated on God, be very fixated on his word, be very hyper focused on cultivating the relationship with him first before you seek out a relationship partner. I am very much in tune to the idea of singleness right now, like because I have known what it feels like to be on the opposite side of the spectrum, being in relationships that God had no business, like I had no business being in the first place. So for me, it's like, no, I am taking my time, like not to mention, like I'm not even dating right now. Like I have fully committed to the idea of like God is first, like he is the ruler of my life. And until God gives me the go ahead to actually start dating, like it is just something that I'm not interested in. And it's like, yeah, like you may be pursued, but it's like if you are being pursued and you're following into the pursuit without testing the spirit first, then you are going to continue to wind up in the same relationship again and again. So again, like I am encouraging you to like stay in your word, stay in relationship with God, like allow him to be your matchmaker, but more importantly, allow him to fill you so that way you will never be in a place where you are valuing the idea of love more than you're valuing him. I hope you guys got something out of this today. Have a blessed week.